Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Wow, that is no pressure. $1 billion goal, following Mr. Masalam over here from last year. When Shelley asked me to be here and tell my personal story, I honestly had no idea what I would talk about. And then I got to thinking that maybe there is a story here to tell. You see, how I came here to be with all of you today is not your typical story of how one becomes a philanthropist. In fact, my story of how I got here is based on a culmination of a series of life-changing decisions that I made to prioritize giving, oftentimes when it was most uncomfortable and when I was most vulnerable. The first of those decisions came when I was just in my mid-20s. I was a young information technology manager for a little company called Intel, based in the Bay Area. And I was also solely responsible for their disaster recovery plan when 9/11 hit. And so I found myself, a team of me and 2 others, sitting there watching the Twin Towers. And I was somehow compelled to start writing. So I took out my laptop, still sitting in my pajamas, watching the replays, started typing furiously for hours upon hours. And what I had written was ultimately the conclusion that if 9/11 had happened to Intel, they would never recover. And so I felt this deep sense of responsibility to document all those vulnerabilities, but what it was actually doing was outing me and my team, right? That ultimately we were responsible for securing Intel's data, and we hadn't done the job. We hadn't actually accomplished that. And so I decided to take that paper, it was now a 10-page paper, and send it up the ranks to the highest levels of management. Here I thought this crazy, bold decision to document all these things that we had yet to fix would probably land me out of a job, right? I mean, essentially that was what I had concluded. However, surprisingly, 24 hours later, I get this phone call from the office of the CIO asking me how much money I needed and how many people I needed to go fix this. Well, I hadn't put a budget in that plan. I'm in my mid-20s, so any 20-year-old would probably go, I don't know. I guessed, and I gave them a really large number, and I asked for a ton of people, and they said, great, you have 3 years to go fix it. So I spent the next 3 years basically creating an enterprise and global disaster recovery program that still exists today at Intel 18 years later. That critical decision, though, to help however I could, even to the possible detriment of my career, has led to exponential benefits for me. So much so that I actually started my own consulting practice in this very field, which also continues today. So now fast forward to my 30s, mid-30s, and I had left Intel after about a decade and decided to join a tech startup. That was the thing to do. However, in 2008, I found myself out of a job for the first time in my professional career. The tech startup wasn't getting funded anymore. At the same time, my husband in technology also hated his job and was ready to quit. We also got a phone call really quickly thereafter from our adoption agency that our adoption had gone through and that now we'd be bringing home a 2.5-year-old little girl from India. So we went really quickly from being dinks, dual income, no kids, you guys know what that means, right? To now single income with a kid on the way. The natural reaction, I think, for most anybody would be to just hunker down, right? Financially, start conserving as much money as you can because right now we're living off of our savings and we have a family that's growing. Ultimately, though, I got this amazing piece of advice from a good friend of mine. And she said to me, give more of what you want to receive. And I said, okay, that's interesting. I thought about that, and it really kind of resonated with me. So I took another leap of faith, and I started to think about how I could help others, how I could play a role in my community to build a stronger community, and give back financially. It's not an easy decision. In fact, it was a very, very difficult decision, certainly not a natural one. And it was a decision that had to involve my husband. Ryan had to be in on this, right? This crazy idea. And so can you imagine the tense discussions that must have occurred in our household? as we're ready to bring home this little girl and we're living off of our savings, knowing we're at a really difficult time in our economy, I could have been out of a job for a long time. And we could have been out of our, half of our income as a result. However, through those tense discussions, we both found ourselves incredibly passionate about our viewpoints. My viewpoint was that if we wanted to change our situation financially, we would have to give more financially than what we wanted to receive. His viewpoint, who is my husband, was just as passionate about, was the fact that I was completely nuts. It's like, there's no way we should be doing this. Well, thank goodness I was a little more persuasive than he was, and 10 years ago, we wrote our first check to the Red Cross. Then the next month, we wrote another check. And that was the beginning of our giving strategy. Now, within months of that, our financial position had actually completely changed. It shifted. I decided to start my own technology consulting practice at the height of the Great Recession, because why not? And landed my first big client almost immediately. I haven't looked back since. My husband and I also, 10 years later, now give 10% of our annual income every year. And now, when we look back, we're giving 20, 30 times more than what we did 10 years ago when we wrote that first check. And by doing this, through the partnership and support of the Orange County Community Foundation, we were able to start getting the advice that we needed to really structure our philanthropy. In fact, we were able to now bring our children into our philanthropic endeavors. My husband now would tell you that we actually have a philanthropic plan that actually helps fulfill our family's charitable desires. It's come a long way in 10 years. There's no way when we wrote that check 10 years ago that we would ever think that I'd be here standing with you all and that we'd be here sitting at the Block Family Foundation table. You could have never convinced me of that. So we're both very active in our nonprofits. We're both very passionate about children's causes and women's causes. And now we give not only our money, we also give our time. And I guess you could say that my deep sense of wanting to do more, always wanting to help however I can, came from my mom. It's something I think I got from her. I watched my mom raise 3 kids, work in a full-time business with my dad, 24/7. It was a nonstop business. But at the same time, I also watched her give her time and talent away tirelessly. I saw her give that away despite the fact that she didn't have any extra time. My mom never waited to find the extra time to give back. She always gave back regardless. And so recently, she was actually acknowledged by her community posthumously for the service that she gave over the last 40 years, which is something I'm very proud of. So for those of you that have yet to start this journey, I hope you leave here inspired a little bit to just start. You may not have a lot. You may not have a whole lot of extra money to give, but I hope that you find a way to just start. And then when you do start, I hope that you keep learning, keep experimenting. Find the right partners that are going to help you along the way. So before I conclude, I want to thank you all for being here and being a part of this incredible milestone in the Foundation's history. It's so amazing to see how far our community has come in the last 30 years. But before I go, I want to leave you with 2 questions to ponder. What leap of faith do you need to take today? And how many lives will you impact by making a bold commitment to give more of what you want to receive? Thank you.